All right, welcome back to Breakfast Television. It's time for a BT panel, and the latest census numbers suggest the number of Anglophones is on the rise here in Quebec, even outside of Montreal and smaller towns. Now, some are now questioning those numbers. StatsCan is going to be looking into this, but it got us thinking about all things Anglo-Franco, from language laws to this new proposed Bill 202. We're talking about the two solitudes. Lots to get to in a panel, by the way. So we're going to introduce you to our panel. We have Dr. Joanne Vrakas. She is a professor, separatist, and the author of Shakespeare in Quebec. Francois Parentau is a filmmaker and the man behind a great documentary called Qui est nous. Patrick White is the managing editor at the Huffington Post Quebec, and Chris Curtis has been here many times, and we enjoy him every single time, from the Montreal Gazette. Thank you all so much, because I'm going to be putting you on the hot seat. We got lots to get to. First and foremost, the numbers now are being questioned, right? Like, did somebody fall asleep on a keyboard at StatsCan? Because fundamentally, let's talk about the numbers. Do we think that there is a big influx of Anglophones, mother tongue Anglophones outside of Montreal, or do you think that something possibly went wrong with the census here?
Well, I don't see it happening, except there's more an influx of immigrants all across Quebec, around 60,000 a year. A lot of those immigrants do not speak French. That's one of the main issues. But I don't see the 200% rise in Rimouski, Rivière-du-Loup, regions like Lac-Saint-Jean. I really don't get it.
Okay, so that aside, though, the numbers do have, so they're investigating this. So if there is an increase, maybe not the 200% we're talking about, is this a good or a bad thing for Quebec? I'll ask you.
It's obviously a problem for Quebec if we have rising Anglicization and the loss of French in Quebec. I mean, the official common language of Quebec is French. And in Montreal, we're at the 50% point. I mean, imagine if 50% of people in Paris didn't speak French anymore, or 50% of people in London didn't speak English, or 50% of people in Berlin didn't speak German. What a loss that would be for each of those cultures. So,
but okay, and jump in at any moment. Does the number, do those numbers suggest, does it mean that when you have more English-speaking people, they don't necessarily speak French? Are we losing that idea that there's bilingualism is also on the rise?
Statistically, about 50% of Quebecers are bilingual. You compare that to Canada, where it's more like 18. It's not necessarily a terrible thing, and you have to look at the numbers in a sort of a larger historical context. Maybe the trend is going in one direction. This is a small anomaly. It'll correct itself. Keep a closer look at the number, but we're talking 60,000 people. It's not... The future of the French language does not hinge on this one set of statistical data.
It's not something to panic about, right? Do you agree?
I agree. It's not something to panic about, but it's something to act about, because it's not necessarily going in the right direction for the safeness of French in Quebec. But in the Harper years, we had surveys that were a bit more clouded, and now we see maybe the right picture.
So, okay, in general, is there a sense in 2017, there are the census numbers and the stats numbers that show that, we were just talking about, many people are bilingual now, which means 101 worked, right? You wanted Anglophones to learn how to speak French, and it's working. Is the French language and French culture still threatened in 2017?
Yeah, it is threatened in the long term, not in the short term and midterm. Well, you see the steady decline of French every 5 years. Now it's about 78% of the population speak French, at home. It used to be 85%. So it's a slow decline of 2% every 5 years. In the long run, in 100 years or 75 years, that could be an issue. That's why the government will probably have to react at some point. But the Liberal government has not reacted since the census. So that's very bizarre.
Is there a sense, do you think, out there that it is, as you said, within 100 years or whatever, that it will be threatened? Is this does this make sense to you? Do you actually see this happening in a place like Quebec, that the French language could disappear?
You have to keep an eye on it. And I think more and more Anglophones know that that's just the reality, that you should keep an eye on it. I mean, you look at Indigenous communities across Canada, right? Like the effect of being surrounded by people who don't speak that language, it has eroded dozens and dozens of Indigenous languages over time. So you look at this problem that we have in Quebec, and it's like on steroids in Indigenous communities. So consider that when you're thinking about the long term.
And if you look at the numbers for the stats from last week, the number of people speaking native languages in Montreal right now is under 800 people.
Under 800 people. So,
So,
yeah,
I mean-
so losing a language, losing culture, this is something that can happen. Let's talk, and we're going to go to commercial now, but I want to talk about the two solitudes, right? We've been talking about the two solitudes. Many people are saying that's very old-fashioned because there's many more solitudes than that at this point. We're still trying to understand each other. And I want to get your take on Bill 202, right? If the French language is being threatened, are we going too far? Did the language laws work? Do we need more? I know a lot of people are reacting at home and they just hear language laws and they're getting all freaked out. But you don't want to miss this. Stay tuned.
There is a certain solitude between the two communities, but I think it's gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. So I think we're moving towards sort of melting the two cultures together.
We live in Quebec. We know that there's always that English-French separation no matter what. We've been trying to get over it since the '94 referendum. It hasn't really done anything yet. And ultimately, I don't think we ever will.
Separation? No, I don't think so. Everybody lives together, and I think it's perfect like that.
All right, welcome back to BT. We're talking two solitudes, language laws, and all the things that get us excited here in La Belle Province. We have a fabulous panel to talk all about it. We're going to dive right in because panel, as we just saw there, many Montrealers we spoke to on the street said, you know, and I have a sense that it's an on-island thing. Like Montrealers feel like, you know, we're okay. The two solitudes, we sort of get each other, we understand each other. Outside of Montreal may be a different story. Jean-François Lisée proposing Bill 202, which would take the language laws further. I got to get you in here, Jennifer. You're saying we need tougher language laws. We need to go after. We need to make sure that the French language is protected. How much more do you want to see done?
I would like to see all of 202 implemented because we have to remember that Bill 101 has been constantly eroded and undermined by the Supreme Court since it was implemented. So a lot of the original provisions no longer exist. Even just very recently, the Supreme Court undermined the provisions about have the rules required for an employer asking about having an employee speak English when it's not even necessary. So the Supreme Court of Canada is constantly eroding Bill 101. So we need a new Bill 202 to reinforce and bring back stronger laws.
So to all of you, you know, a lot of business owners are watching this morning and they're freaking out because they're going to think this is going to make it harder to run a business in Quebec if you tighten these language laws. So what do you think?
It shouldn't be harder. I mean, it's the language of Quebec is French, so making sure everybody works in French will only ensure that we work together as a, you know, I think if the laws are not hard enough, people can become harder themselves, and the tensions are going to be between humans. I think if the laws, I think, you know, saying it's a toughening the law. I think it's modernizing it because, you know, back then, small enterprises, small businesses were a rarity, a family stuff. Nowadays, it's most of the business are small businesses.
But
so
what do you say about
be
English being the language of business? If you're working in finance and you want to start something up here, and all of a sudden, you know, your emails have to be in French, everything has to be in French. If you were talking about really toughening up the laws, does that make sense? Are we being anti-prosperity with this?
I don't know if it's necessarily prosperity. I mean, let me give you an example that's not in the private sector. I have a friend of mine born in a refugee camp in China, speaks Khmer, English, French, is an amazing social worker. Like, you're not going to get a more caring, better social worker, but does not put her commas in the right place. Like, the French is not where it should be. And it took her years to become a member of the Ordre des Travailleurs Sociaux.
Because of the French language test.
And I mean, look, we're in a society that needs more social workers. Like, more and more kids are diagnosed with autism. More and more kids have mental health issues. You need these people on the front lines. And
you bring up a great point, and I'm opening this up to the panel, Chris. So what is more important? This is a perfect example. We need more social workers. She doesn't know where to put her commas necessarily. What is more important, the French language or the actual service provided?
I think we should start with a better integration of immigrants. We should restart and relaunch the COFI, the Center for the integration of immigrants, better French lessons for them. And I think we need to overhaul the French education system at the primary level and the high school level to better teach French speakers to speak French as well.
I think that's
That's
Okay.
going to be fired up over a comma.
No, you won't
Or
be
an
fired
email,
over
or
a
an email.
comment, but you won't pass the test that you need to get into the ordre des travailleurs sociaux or to be allowed to practice
But
medicine.
let's face it, if this person has a year to get better in French, it's going to be a better social worker for Quebec.
I'm going to tell you something. If we challenge the majority of unilingual francophones to pass those same tests, I don't think the majority of them would. So is this fair? Are we treating immigrants at a higher, putting the bar much higher for them?
It should be the same for everyone. You're
It
right on
should
this.
be,
And-
but would
No, Bill 202 is proposing a uniform test in the CEGEPs that would be the same for the Francophone CEGEPs and for the Anglophone CEGEPs. And it's also proposing that we actually pay the new immigrants to take the French classes. So it's not like we're stopping them from making a living. We're paying them to learn French. So what's wrong with that?
Okay,
I mean,
so-
I would love to be paid to go to school extra.
No, but honestly, say Bill 202 passes and okay, so these laws pass. I maybe, like many people at home, I'm having a hard time understanding where the struggle is. Like, are we really, had his friend been allowed to get into the Order of Social Workers, a year before, I mean, didn't we lose as a society? Are we not, if we're not graduating the students, if we're not putting people on the job market, I mean, where do we draw the line? Where do we say this is important, but we need this sooner rather than later?
I think it's important to be bilingual on a personal basis. That personally helped me and changed my life. But I think it's important to promote and really strengthen the French language in Quebec, especially in and around Montreal.
Okay.
But I think you made an excellent point, too, about our educational system, because you look at dropout rates in this province, they're huge. And I don't want to be specifically among the Francophone population. They're
It's a
much higher than
disaster.
and it speaks perhaps more to a problem of how do you reform education, how do you make it more efficient, how do you incentivize graduating high school versus how do we punish.
So is it the cart before the horse? Shouldn't the PQ government be proposing then, and I'm opening this to all of you, before we're going ahead with Bill 202, shouldn't we work on bettering our public schools? Shouldn't we work on bettering our French programs for everyone? I mean, isn't this just, sort of the rhetoric of politics? Like, I'm going out there and I'm going to make the language laws tougher. I mean, what's more important? Where do we start?
Well, I think Bill 202 would be a start for that, because it's been a while since French have been, souligné, comment on dit, as an important, stressed as an important binding fact in Quebec. It's always been, backing up, and now I think it's time to say, we need to bring it up a little. Just having cégep in French for everybody. I think. Of course, it's going to be bilingual. More English, better English classes would be great.
And it's not a cart horse problem. We're talking about Bill 202, which is one aspect of the PQ platform for next year's elections. But there's also the whole other chapter of their proposal on education. There's a chapter on healthcare. It's not like we're saying, we'll only talk about immigrants and improving French for them, and we're not going to talk about improving the public school system. Of course, improving the public school system will happen too. These are simultaneous programs.
Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. Thank you to all of you. We have run out of time. I do want to end on a positive note that we could have had this discussion in French or in English.
We could have.
Merci
All
à
of
tout le
us.
monde. Merci beaucoup. Have a fabulous weekend. Come back anytime. Stay tuned. Regardez Breakfast Television on City.